My son called me on a Tuesday morning in November, and the first thing he said, not hello, not how are you, not even mom, was, we need you to sign the house over. You owe us that much. I was standing at my kitchen sink with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Outside the window, the maple in the yard had dropped most of its leaves, and the bare branches were doing that thing they do in November, that reaching. I looked at those branches, and I listened to my son tell me I owed him my house, and then I said, very quietly, let me think about that. I hung up. I went to the kitchen table. I sat down. I looked at the four walls of the house where I had lived for 31 years. The house where I had brought my children home from the hospital. The house where I had buried 2 dogs and 1 husband. The house I had paid off, by myself, 16 months after my husband Gerald passed, because Gerald had left debts nobody knew about, and I had worked 3 years of double shifts and eaten rice and beans and nights a week. Paid everything, because I am a woman who does not leave things unfinished. I sat at that table for 11 minutes. Then I picked up the phone and I called my attorney, and then I left town. Welcome to Alpha Mom Stories, where the house they want was never really about the house. Stay with me until the very end, because what was inside this story, what my son didn't know I knew, what my attorney was already holding, and what happened when I came back, it's going to take the full length of the telling to do it justice. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a comment when you're done. I read everyone. My name is Vivian Marsh. I am 67 years old. For 32 years, I was a registered nurse. 12 years in the ER, 8 in the ICU, 12 more in home health, the kind of work that teaches you the difference between a person in a temporary crisis and a person in a permanent one. In the ER, you learn to read people fast, because speed is survival. You learn that what a person says in the first 60 seconds tells you nearly everything you need to know. You learn that the people who are the calmest in a crisis are usually the ones who have accepted what's happening, and the people making the most noise are the ones who haven't yet. You learn that the worst thing you can do in a medical emergency is panic, because panic is expensive. It costs time, it costs clarity, it costs the very things you need most. I spent 32 years not panicking. I was not going to start now. My house is a yellow Craftsman on Ellery Street, in a town that is not large enough to be a city and not small enough to be quaint. It has 3 bedrooms and a sleeping porch and a kitchen that Gerald added on in 1998 because the original one was, as he put it, embarrassingly small for a woman who cooks the way you cook. He built that kitchen addition himself over 2 summers with help from his friend Pete and a library book on framing. The cabinets are not perfectly level. The drawer in the corner sticks in humid weather. Gerald's initials are carved into the baseboard on the back wall behind the refrigerator, low down, where nobody would think to look, the way a man signs a thing he made and loves but doesn't need anyone else to confirm. I found those initials a year after he died when I pulled the refrigerator out to clean behind it. I sat on the kitchen floor for an hour. The house is worth, in today's market, somewhere between $440,000 and $480,000, depending on which way the comparable sales run. I know because I had it appraised 8 months before my son's phone call, which tells you something about how long I had felt the pressure building. The appraisal was not a surprise. The number was comfortable. What was interesting was what I did with it, which I will get to, because the sequence matters and I will not rush it. First, let me tell you about my son. Marcus is 41 years old. He is the elder of my 2 children, the one who arrived first and loudest, and has never entirely stopped arriving first and loudest. Marcus is not a bad man. I want to be precise about that, because this story is going to require me to tell you some hard things about him, and I do not want to tell them in a way that is unfair. Marcus is a man who was raised to believe he was exceptional, not by me, not intentionally, but by a sequence of events and circumstances and 1 or 2 decisions I made in his childhood that I understand now were mistakes. He was the oldest, he was the smart one, teachers said so, coaches said so. And Gerald, who adored him, who coached his baseball teams and went to every debate competition and drove him 4 hours each way to the state math Olympiad. Gerald sometimes looked at Marcus the way you look at something you made that turned out better than you had any right to expect. And Marcus absorbed that look and carried it inside himself and built a life around it. For 20 years, it served him fine. He was successful in the actual, measurable sense, the career, the income, the house in the right neighborhood. He married a woman named Brooke, who is beautiful and smart, and who manages their household the way some people manage a corporation, with strategy and metrics and a clear understanding of inputs and outputs. I am, in Brooke's accounting, an input. What I mean by that is this. In the 7 years since Marcus married Brooke, My relationship with my son has shifted in a direction I can only describe as transactional. When they needed a down payment for the house in the right neighborhood, they came to me. When they needed childcare for the first 2 years after the twins were born, because daycare was too expensive and Brooke's mother was not available, I drove 40 minutes each way 3 days a week for 24 months, and I did it gladly, because I love those children with a fierceness that surprises even me. When they needed someone to fly down and stay for 3 weeks when Brooke had her gallbladder out, I went. When they needed, and I am going to be accurate here, not generous, when they needed anything, I was the place they reached for it. I did not mind. I want to be clear about that too. I am their mother and grandmother, and I did not do these things under duress. I did them because I wanted to. Because I am by nature a person who shows up. Because showing up is what I know how to do. What I did mind, what I began to mind slowly, the way you begin to mind a house slowly tilting on its foundation, was the absence of the ordinary courtesies. The return phone calls that stopped coming, the birthdays acknowledged by text sometimes, the Thanksgiving 2 years ago when Brooke announced, midway through the meal I had cooked, that next year they were going to her parents' place in Scottsdale, and I was welcome to come if I wanted, as though my own holiday table was an option I was being offered rather than a place I had stood for 30 years. I said, "That sounds lovely." I passed the sweet potatoes. I went home that night and I sat in Gerald's chair and I talked to him the way I do sometimes late when the house is quiet. I told him what had happened. I told him I wasn't sure what to do with it. He didn't answer, of course, because Gerald has been gone for 9 years and the dead don't answer. But sometimes the sitting is enough. Sometimes the asking is the thing. Should tell you about my daughter, Celeste, because she is the other side of this story, and you cannot understand one without the other. Celeste is 38. She is 3 years younger than Marcus, and she arrived into the world the way she has moved through it, quietly, without announcement, with a self-sufficiency that has always been both her greatest strength and the thing that makes her hardest to reach. Celeste is a librarian in a mid-sized city 4 hours away. She has a small apartment and a large cat named Gerald and a life that suits her precisely, that she has built exactly to the dimensions she wanted, without anyone else's input. She does not ask me for things. She never has. As a child, she was the one who figured things out independently before telling anyone she was figuring anything out. She called me on my birthday, every year, exactly on the day, and talked for as long as there was something to say. She came home twice a year, reliably, and made herself useful and then left. She was not warm in the way Marcus was warm. Marcus could fill a room, always, but she was steady in a way that I understood better as I got older and came to value more. Celeste came home 3 weeks before Marcus's phone call. She had not announced she was coming. She simply appeared on a Wednesday afternoon with a bag of groceries, and the particular expression she wears when she has decided that something needs attending to. "I want to talk to you about Marcus," she said. I put on the kettle. "All right," I said. What Celeste told me over 2 hours and 2 pots of tea was the shape of something I had felt, but not yet fully seen. She had spoken to Marcus recently. They had dinner when she passed through his city on a work trip, and Marcus had said things. Things about my house, about what it was worth, about the fact that I was 67 and living alone in a $400,000 house, and that it made more financial sense, given the family's circumstances, for the equity in the house to be working harder. He had said that Gerald's money, what there had been of it, had never been properly distributed. He had said, and this is the part Celeste repeated twice to make sure I heard it, he had said, "Mom owes us, honestly. She never gave us what Dad would have wanted." Celeste put her mug down. She looked at me steadily. "I want you to know what's being said," she said, "and I want you to know I have nothing to do with it, and I want no part of it." I nodded. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to think," I said. She stayed 2 days. She fixed the sticky drawer in the kitchen. She cleaned the gutters without being asked. On her last morning, she stood at the front door with her bag over her shoulder and she said, "Whatever you decide, the house, all of it, it's yours. You earned it twice, once with Dad and once after." Then she hugged me, which Celeste does not do lightly, and she left. I stood on the porch and watched her car until it turned the corner. Then I went inside and I called my attorney, a woman named Susan Greer, who had handled Gerald's estate and who I had used for several things since, and I told her I wanted to come in. "When?" she said. "This week," I said. "I want to tell you about that meeting with Susan, because it was the meeting that changed the shape of everything that came after." Susan Greer is 62 years old, and she has been a family law and estate attorney for 30 years. And she has the manner of a woman who has heard everything and is not surprised by any of it. When I sat down across from her desk and told her what Celeste had told me and what I suspected was coming, she nodded in the way that means, "Yes, this is a thing that happens. I've seen this before. We can work with this." She asked me questions, good questions, methodical ones. What assets did I have beyond the house? What was my income in retirement, my pension, my social security, what I'd managed to save? Had I given Marcus money in the past, and if so, had it been documented? What was my health situation? What were my long-term plans for the property? I answered each one honestly. Then she told me what my options were, all of them. She did not editorialize or tell me what she thought I should do. She laid it out the way a good doctor lays out a treatment plan. Here is what is, here is what could be, here is what happens if you go left, and here is what happens if you go right. And one of the options she laid out, the one that sat in my chest the whole drive home and was still there when I woke up the next morning, was one I had not considered. I am going to tell you what that option was, but not yet, because the story requires you to understand what happened first. 3 weeks after that meeting with Susan, on a Tuesday morning in November, my son called. "We need you to sign the house over," he said. "You owe us that much." I said I would think about it. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for 11 minutes, and then I did 2 things. The first thing, I called Susan. "It's happening," I said. "I know," she said. "Come in Thursday. I'll have everything ready." The second thing was that I packed a bag. I want to explain the leaving because I think it might seem dramatic to people who don't understand what it was. It was not dramatic. It was not a flight. It was not panic, because I had spent 32 years not panicking and I was not starting now. What it was this. I knew that if I stayed in that house while the conversation with Marcus unfolded, I would be accessible. I would pick up the phone when he called back, and he would call back that same day or the next, pressing for an answer, pressing the way he has always pressed when he wants something, and the first ask hasn't yielded it. I would be in the house that was at the center of the dispute, which is never where you want to be when a dispute is beginning. And I would be alone with my feelings about it, which were complicated enough that I did not entirely trust myself to manage them without the support of something other than my own kitchen. So I packed a bag. I called my friend Miriam, who has been my friend for 27 years and who lives 4 hours away in the same city where Celeste lives, because sometimes the universe arranges things tidily, and you should take note. I called Miriam and I said, "I'm coming to visit. I'm going to stay a week, possibly 2. Is your guest room available?" "It has been waiting for you," Miriam said, which is the kind of answer that makes you understand why certain friendships last 27 years. I watered my plants. I left a note with my neighbor Phyllis, who waters them when I'm away and who has a key for exactly these situations. I locked the front door. I got in my car. I drove 4 hours. The whole way I did not listen to music or the radio. I drove in silence, which is what I do when I am sorting through something, because silence gives the thoughts room to arrange themselves into their proper order. This is what I sorted through on that drive. My husband Gerald was a man of specific and precise love. He did not love broadly or generally. He loved in detail. He remembered things, the right things, the things that mattered, and he expressed love by remembering them. My birthday preferences held exact in his memory for 38 years. The way I take my coffee. The name of my 7th grade teacher who had been unkind to me, whom he remembered still decades after I had mentioned her once. He remembered the things that told him who I was, and he kept them as carefully as other men keep financial records. He also expressed love by providing for it. Gerald was not a wealthy man, an electrician who built his small business over 30 years and sold it for a modest sum when his health began to decline. But he was a careful one. He believed, with the quiet conviction of a man who had grown up without much, that you build a floor under the people you love, that you make sure they have something solid to stand on when the ground shifts. He spent his working life building that floor. When he died, I discovered that the floor had some unexpected holes. The debts I mentioned earlier were real, and they were substantial. Not debts from carelessness or dishonesty, but from the medical expenses of his last 2 years, which our insurance had covered imperfectly, and which Gerald had managed quietly, not wanting to worry me, paying what he could with what he had, and meaning to tell me the rest later. There was no later. I paid those debts, all of them. It took 3 years, and it required the double shifts and the rice and beans, and the selling of a few things I would rather have kept. I paid them because they were Gerald's, and Gerald was mine, and I do not leave things unfinished. And when the last one was cleared, I sat at the kitchen table with the final zero balance statement, and I said, out loud to the empty house, "There, it's done. We're even." What I did not say, because I did not yet know it, was that in paying off those debts I had also, in a way I didn't understand for another 2 years, paid off something else. Some accounting inside myself. Some settling of what I was owed and what I owed and what the ground under my own feet consisted of. The house was paid off in that same period. Gerald had a mortgage life insurance policy, modest, that covered most of what remained, and I paid the rest. The house became mine entirely, in the full legal and financial and emotional sense of that word, 4 years after Gerald died. I had earned it once in the living of a life inside it, and once in the surviving of its aftermath. Marcus knew none of this in its full detail. He knew his father had died and left debts. In the vague way adult children know difficult things their parents have managed without asking them to help. He had offered to help, at the time, offered in the way of a man who means it but also knows the offer is unlikely to be taken up, and was relieved when it wasn't. I did not tell him what those years actually cost me. The double shifts, the small divestments, the nights in Gerald's chair trying to breathe through an anxiety that had never really been part of my nature before, and that I had to learn to manage late in life when I had less patience for. Learning. I did not tell him because he did not ask. That is not a reproach. It is a description. There is a difference, and in those 4 hours of driving I was trying to hold on to it. Marcus did not ask because Marcus was building his own life. He had a career and a marriage and then the twins, and a life that had its own weather that he was navigating. He did not look too carefully at mine because it did not occur to him that mine required careful looking. I was his mother. Mothers manage. That is the operating assumption, and it is not unique to Marcus. It is the ambient water of how adulthood children often relate to their parents until something makes them look directly at the fact that their parents are people, specific ones, with specific circumstances and specific histories that deserve to be actually seen. What made me sad in those 4 hours was not that Marcus was making a claim on my house. What made me sad was the reason he thought he could. He thought he could because for 7 years I had been available to him in the ways I described. The down payment, the childcare, the flights, the Thanksgiving tables, and he had experienced that availability as ordinary, as the baseline, as what was owed. And when something is experienced as owed, the person who provides it stops being a person providing it and becomes simply the source of it. The tap that produces water, the outlet that provides electricity. You don't think about the tap. You don't consider the outlet. You only notice when they stop working. Gerald, if he had been alive, would have told Marcus something about this. He would have done it quietly, over a beer, without drama, in the direct way he had with Marcus that I never quite managed. He would have said something plain and true, something Marcus would have complained about for a week and then metabolized and carried forever. Gerald was good at that. He could say the hard thing in a way that landed without leaving a wound. Gerald was not here, and so what had not been said, and the gap had grown large enough that my son felt entitled to call me on a Tuesday morning in November and tell me I owed him my house. I drove 4 hours. When I arrived at Miriam's, she met me at the door with a glass of wine and the understanding that I would explain when I was ready and that she was not going to press. We sat on her porch in the cold. Miriam has always believed that fresh air is obligatory regardless of season, and I drank the wine and looked at the dark street and started slowly to explain. Miriam listened the way the best listeners do, completely, without preparing her response while you're still speaking. She let me finish entirely before she said anything. And when she spoke, she did not say what I expected. She said, "What do you want, Vivian? Not what you should do. Not what's fair. What do you actually want?" I looked at her. "To keep the house," I said. "Keep it," she said. "It isn't that simple. It's exactly that simple. Everything else is the work of making simple things possible." I thought about that for a long time. In the 4 days that followed, Marcus called 6 times. I did not answer. I sent once a brief text. "I am taking time to consider and will be in touch." That is all I said. He responded with 3 messages that escalated in a direction I had expected. The first polite, the second pointed, the third containing the phrase, "You're being unreasonable." And then, significantly, "Brooke says this is exactly what she was afraid you'd do." I read that third message at Miriam's kitchen table and I showed it to Miriam without comment. She read it. She handed the phone back. "Brooke says," she said with a particular dryness. "Yes," I said. "Go call Susan." I called Susan. Here is what Susan had been doing while I was at Miriam's. She had been preparing a document. The document was a letter, formal, specific, on legal letterhead, addressed to Marcus. It outlined in the clinical language of estate and property law the following facts: that the property at my address was owned outright, free and clear, by me alone, Vivian Marie Marsh. that my husband, Gerald David Marsh, had died without a will, a fact that had complicated his estate considerably, and that the disposition of all assets since that time had been handled by me alone and in full accordance with applicable law. That during the period following Gerald's death I had satisfied debts totaling a specific sum from my own earnings and savings without contribution from or obligation to any other party. That the property in question was therefore the result of my sole effort, and was subject to my sole discretion regarding its use, transfer, or disposition. It also outlined that any attempt to pressure, coerce, or legally compel the transfer of the property would be met with the full legal response available to me, which Susan enumerated in 4 clear paragraphs. And it outlined one more thing, a thing that Susan had suggested in our first meeting, and that I had, in the 11 minutes at the kitchen table and the 4 hours of driving and the 4 days at Miriam's, decided to do. I had changed my will. I want to tell you about that clearly, because it is the center of everything, and it deserves to be stated plainly. Before this happened, before Marcus's phone call, before Celeste's visit, before the appraisal and the meeting with Susan, my will had left the house and all my assets equally divided between my 2 children. That is what I had intended. That had been the plan, quietly held, for years. Equal to Marcus and equal to Celeste, because they were equally my children, and that felt right. After this happened, I changed it. Not to disinherit Marcus. I want to be precise. I am not a vindictive woman, and I did not make this decision from anger. I made it from clarity. The same clarity I had found in those 4 hours of driving, when I sorted through what I knew about Gerald, and what I knew about my house, and what I knew about the years that had produced it. What I changed was this. I left the house to Celeste, the full house, the yellow Craftsman on Ellery Street, with the imperfect cabinets and the sticky drawer, and Gerald's initials carved in the baseboard behind the refrigerator. I left it to Celeste, outright, with no conditions. I left Marcus a sum of money. Fair, substantial, representing his share of the liquid assets I would have otherwise divided equally. It was not nothing. It was not a punishment. It was an acknowledgement that he was my son and I loved him and he would be provided for. But the house went to Celeste. And the reason, the specific considered reason, which I had written down at Miriam's kitchen table so that I would say it right when I needed to, was this. Celeste had never asked me for the house. She had never asked me for anything. She had shown up in October when something told her to show up, made tea, told me what I needed to know, fixed the stuck drawer, cleaned the gutters, and told me the house was mine because I had earned it. She had demonstrated, in the small and unremarkable ways that demonstrate the most important things, that she understood what the house was, that it was not an asset to be liquidated, that it was not equity to be redistributed, that it was the place where her father's initials were carved in the baseboard. And the kitchen addition was built from a library book, and her mother had eaten rice and beans for 3 years to make sure it stayed standing. She understood what it was. Marcus had called it something he was owed. You can argue about what's fair. I have sat with that argument, and I understand it. Some people will hear this and think, you punished Marcus for asking. Maybe, but I think what I actually did was something different. I recognized the person who had shown me she understood what I had built, and I put the thing I'd built in her hands. That is not punishment. That is the right destination for a thing you love. Susan sent the letter to Marcus on the 8th day after his phone call. By that time, I was still at Miriam's, which was deliberate. I did not want to be in the house, or within reach by car, when he received it. He received it on a Thursday. He called Susan directly, which she had anticipated. She took the call. She was, by her account, calm and complete and gave him no ground whatsoever. He told her I was being manipulated, by Celeste, she assumed, since Celeste was the only other person in the picture. Susan told him that was not a conversation she was in a position to have. He asked about the will. She told him she was not at liberty to discuss it, but that his interests were considered and he would be informed in due course. He called me 4 times that day. I answered on the 4th call. I want to tell you what that conversation was like, because I think it is the most important part of the story, and I am not going to shortchange it. Marcus was not on the 4th call, the Marcus who had called me on that Tuesday morning with the edge in his voice and the entitlement already fully formed. He was quieter. He was, underneath the quiet, frightened, though he would not have named it that. When men like Marcus are frightened, they often present as controlled and careful, because losing control is, to them, a greater threat than whatever is frightening them. Mom, he said. Marcus, I said, I need to understand what's happening. I think you do understand, I said. I think Susan's letter was clear. A pause. You're keeping the house. Yes. And he stopped. Did you change your will? That's between me and my attorney. A longer pause. Brooke is? He stopped again. Started differently. We had a plan, Mom. A financial plan. We have debt. We have 2 kids in school in 4 years. We had counted on, and there it was, the sentence that tells you everything. We had counted on. I let it sit on the line between us for a moment. I have done enough ER nursing to know that sometimes the most useful thing you can do is wait for a person to hear themselves. Marcus, I said, I want you to listen to what you just said. Silence. You had counted on my house. You had built a financial plan that included an asset you do not own and that no one promised you. You called me on a Tuesday morning and told me I owed it to you. And when I didn't immediately agree, you called it unreasonable. I paused. I need you to understand that the house was never part of your plan to have. It was mine to give or not give on my terms when I chose. And the way you went about this conversation, I stopped. Gathered. The way this was handled has changed what I intend to do. A very long silence. Are you saying you're cutting me out? He said. His voice was flat. I'm saying nothing about the will, I said. I'm saying that your house is mine, that I earned it, that I will live in it for as long as I choose, and after that it will go where I decide it will go, and that decision will reflect the relationships in my life as they actually are, not as someone else has planned for them to be. I heard him breathe. I love you, Marcus, I said. I have loved you since before you were born, and I will love you until I can't. But loving you does not mean giving you what you demand. And I need you to think about whether the man your father raised would have made that phone call. I waited. He wouldn't have, Marcus said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. No, I said. He wouldn't have. We stayed on the line for a moment more, neither of us speaking. The way you stay in a room after something has changed in it, just to register that it has changed. I'll call you next week, I said. Okay, he said. I hung up. I sat in Miriam's guest room with the phone in my lap. Outside the window, the sky was the particular gray of November, the kind of gray that is not bleak but is honest, that makes no promises about what comes next. I cried then. I want to be honest about that, because I've told this story as a story of clarity and composure, and those things are true, but they are not the whole truth. Underneath the clarity, I was a woman who had just had the hardest phone call of her life with the child she loves, and clarity and grief can live together. They often have to. I let it come and I let it go. Then I washed my face and went out to the kitchen where Miriam had dinner on the stove. I came home on a Saturday, 12 days after I left. I drove the 4 hours in the same silence I had driven them before, but it felt different. The thoughts were already in their order. There was nothing left to sort. I pulled into the driveway on Ellery Street. I sat in the car for a moment and looked at the house, the yellow paint that needed refreshing on the south side. The porch where Gerald had built a swing that we never used as much as we intended to, that I sat in now more than I ever did when he was alive. The maple in the front yard with its bare November branches reaching. I went inside. The house smelled like itself, the particular smell of a house that is lived in and loved and old enough to have a character. Wood smoke from the fall and the pine of the floors and something faint and warm that I cannot identify and cannot explain, except say that it has always been there, and it is, in some way I take seriously, Gerald. I put my bag down. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen sink, where I had been standing 12 days earlier with the cup going cold in my hand, and I looked out at the maple in the yard, and I said quietly, to the empty kitchen, to Gerald's initials in the baseboard behind the refrigerator, to the imperfect cabinets and the sticky drawer, and the addition built from a library book over 2 summers. I'm home. Now let me tell you how things settled, because you've stayed with me this long, and you deserve the full accounting. Marcus and I did not speak again for 3 weeks after that phone call. He needed time, and I gave it to him, because there are some understandings that require time and cannot be rushed without being broken. On a Tuesday evening in December, a Tuesday which felt deliberate, though I don't know that it was, he called me. He did not lead with an apology. Marcus is not by nature a man who apologizes easily. What he did was ask how I was doing, and then he listened to the answer, which is something he had not done in a long time, and then he told me some things about his own life, about the debt that was real, and the pressure that was real, and the fear underneath the phone call that he had dressed up as an entitlement, because fear is hard to say out loud and entitlement is easier. I listened. When he was done, I said, I know it's hard, and I'm sorry your father isn't here to help you carry it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think I called you because I knew I could, because you've always been the one who makes things better. I know, I said. But Marcus, making things better doesn't mean making your problems disappear. Sometimes it means being the person who tells you the truth about them. I know, he said. quietly, the way he'd said it on the previous call. The same voice, a little older. We talked for an hour, not about the house, about Gerald mostly, about what his father would have said, about the twins and what Marcus wanted for them and what Gerald had wanted for Marcus, and the ways those things were the same and the ways they weren't. It was the best conversation I had had with my son in years, maybe the best since before Brooke, since before the version of Marcus that had a financial plan for my house. I did not tell him about the will. Susan had advised me to wait, and I agreed. Not to wound him. The money he would receive was fair, and I wanted it to come to him in a context of care, not confrontation. But not yet. Not until the ground between us was more solid. Some things need a better surface. What I will tell you is this. In the 2 months since I came home, Marcus has called me every Sunday. Not always long calls, sometimes 15 minutes, but he calls. He asks how I am and he waits for the answer, and twice he has driven the 2 hours with the twins on a weekend morning, unannounced, not demanding, just showing up. And we have spent the day together, and I have been the grandmother who makes pancakes and lets them help in the kitchen with the sticky drawer that I now think I will never fix. Because it is the kind of thing that makes children feel the house has secrets. He is trying. I can see it. It is the effortful trying of a man who has been told something true about himself and is deciding whether to use it. It does not always go smoothly. There are still moments when I feel the old pattern reasserting, the assumption, the reach. But he catches himself. And catching himself is the work. I know that. I spent 32 years watching people do the hardest kind of work there is, the work of becoming, and I know that catching yourself is where it starts. Celeste came home for Christmas. She did not know about the will. I hadn't told her either. She brought Harold the cat in his carrier and put him down in the living room, and he immediately went behind the couch, which Celeste had apparently expected because she had brought food and a water dish and set them up without comment. On Christmas morning over coffee, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment. "The house," she said. "The house," I said. "Mom." She set down her mug. "I don't. I know you don't need it," I said. "I know you didn't ask for it. That is precisely why it's going to you." She looked out the window at the maple. Bare still. December bare. "His initials are behind the refrigerator," she said after a moment. "I know. You'll find them when you clean back there. Don't wait as long as I did." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "What about Marcus?" "Marcus will be provided for." Barely. She didn't ask more than that. She has always had that particular grace, knowing what is and isn't hers to press. After a while, she got up and went to the kitchen. I heard the drawer open and stick, and then open again, the way it does. I heard her putting the kettle on. She made tea and brought it back, and we sat in the living room with Harold eventually emerging from behind the couch to investigate my ankles. And outside, the December light came through the front window, at the low angle it comes in winter, gold and thin, the way Gerald always said was the best light in the house. "You know," Celeste said, "I used to think you two were so different, you and Dad." "We were," I said, "but you both did the same thing." She held her mug in both hands. "You both just built for it. Whatever was coming, you built for it before it got here." I thought about that. "Your father would have put it differently," I said. "He would have said he just didn't want to leave a mess." Celeste smiled. The particular smile she has that is mostly in her eyes. That's exactly what building for it looks like from the outside. I thought about Gerald at the kitchen table over 2 summers with his library book and his level that wasn't quite level and his initials pressed into the baseboard on the last day, low and private, signed like a letter. I thought about those 3 years after his death, the rice and beans and the double shifts and the zero balance statement I had read out loud to the empty house. I thought about the appraisal I had quietly gotten 8 months before Marcus called. The meeting with Susan, the 11 minutes at the table, the 4 hours of driving. All of it, in its way, building for what was coming, building so that when it came there was something to stand on. "Yes," I said, "I suppose it is. Here's what I want you to take from this story. Not the house is mine, and what happens to it is my business, and I have told you it only because you needed to know to understand what I understood. What I want you to take is this. There are people in your life who see you, who know what you have built and what it cost and what it means. They show up when something tells them to. They clean the gutters without being asked. They bring groceries and make tea and tell you the truth and do not press for what is not theirs to know. And there are people who see what you have built and calculate it, who count on it before it is theirs to count on, who call it what they're owed because owing is easier than asking. You do not owe your house to anyone. You do not owe your savings or your labor or your years of double shifts and rice and beans and quiet sacrifice. You do not owe anyone the thing you earned by surviving what you survived. What you owe, the only debt that is real, is the one to the people who made you feel seen. The people who showed up not because they needed something, but because they knew you did. Find those people. Keep them close. And when the time comes, put what you love in their hands. They will know what to do with it. I am still in my house on Ellery Street. I had the south side repainted in the spring, a slightly warmer yellow than before, and the maple is coming in with its new leaves now. That particular yellow-green of early May that is the best color nature makes. I sit on the porch swing in the evenings. Marcus calls on Sundays. Celeste comes in April and October, reliably. Harold the cat, it turns out, likes the porch swing. Gerald's initials are still behind the refrigerator. I know because I pulled it out last week to clean back there, and I sat on the kitchen floor for a little while, and then I got up and I pushed the refrigerator back into its place. Some things you don't need to move. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do right where they are. That is my story. A phone call, a lawyer, a road, and a house that is still mine and will go where it is understood. If it found you at a moment when you needed to hear that you don't owe anyone what you built, drop a comment. I am here. I read everything. Subscribe, because next time I will tell you about the Sunday. Marcus came with the twins and what his youngest said when she found the drawer that sticks, and why I cried in the kitchen where she couldn't see me, and why those were the best tears as I have cried in a long time. Some things take a while to turn into what they were always going to be, but they turn.